Before Bruno Mars ever sold a single record, before the Grammy stages and sold-out arenas and billion-dollar streaming numbers, there was a 4-year-old boy in a tiny glitter jumpsuit shaking his hips like Elvis Presley in front of a packed room in Hawaii. Most children that age are still learning to tie their shoes. Bruno Mars was already a performer, and what followed that early beginning was one of the most extraordinary, painful, and triumphant stories in the history of popular music. Born Peter Gene Hernandez in Honolulu, Hawaii, Bruno grew up inside music the way most children grow up inside bedrooms and backyards. His family ran a musical act in Waikiki, and from almost the moment he could walk, Bruno was their secret weapon. They called him Little Elvis, and the nickname fit perfectly. By the age of 5, he was performing 2 shows a night, 5 days a week. In 1990, at just 5 years old, he stole the show at the Aloha Bowl halftime show in front of 40,000 people. At 6, he appeared on the Arsenio Hall show. At 7, he had a small role in the film Honeymoon in Vegas, earning $600 for a single day's work. He later joked it was his first Vegas residency. Before he turned 10, Bruno Mars had performed nearly 1,000 shows. That is not a childhood. That is a career. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under even the most gifted people. When Bruno was 12 years old, his parents divorced, and the family act dissolved overnight. Suddenly, there was no stage, no spotlight, and no income. Bruno, his father, and his brother found themselves with nowhere stable to go. They slept in a battered yellow 1993 Cadillac. They slept on rooftops in Waikiki. They once spent nights in an abandoned bird zoo where peacocks screamed through the darkness. Without a proper bathroom, they snuck into hotel swimming pools just to bathe. Dinner was often nothing more than Spam musubi from 7-Eleven. For 5 months, they had no electricity at all, and Bruno practiced guitar by moonlight because they couldn't afford amplifiers. At school, other kids mocked him for wearing thrift store clothes. He responded by earning $75 a night impersonating Michael Jackson just to afford demo tapes and bus fare. The struggle was relentless, but so was he. By the time he was 18, Bruno had enough belief in himself to board a plane to Los Angeles with $600, 3 demo CDs, and the name Bruno Mars written on his luggage tag. The name itself was a story. Bruno came from a childhood wrestler he admired, Bruno Sammartino. Mars came from a girl who once told him he was so confident he must be from another planet. It was the perfect name for someone who had always operated in a world slightly beyond ordinary reach. But Los Angeles did not roll out a red carpet. His first year in the city included a $40 a night motel on Sunset Boulevard, a cramped studio apartment in Koreatown shared with 6 other people, and weeks when the only food he could afford was 99-cent tacos from Jack in the Box. He even lied his way into a DJ job on Van Nuys Boulevard despite never having touched DJ equipment in his life. He lasted 2 nights before getting fired, but the $75 he earned kept his phone from being disconnected. In February 2004, Motown Records offered him a deal. It was only 3 pages long, and Bruno later joked he had seen breakfast menus thicker than that. The label had no real vision for him. They wanted a Latin pop singer. 9 months after signing him, they dropped him without releasing a single song. It was humiliating. He had already told his family back home that he had made it. But failure has a way of finding the right people to redirect. Another artist dropped by Motown at the exact same time was a man named Philip Lawrence. The two became close friends and made each other a promise. They would write music that record labels simply could not ignore. What followed was a period of obsessive, unglamorous grind. Bruno and Philip wrote music in the back of Philip's beaten-up 1999 Toyota Corolla parked outside a small Hollywood studio run by a producer named Ari Levine. They paid Levine in burritos from 7-Eleven. Together, the 3 formed a songwriting collective they called the Smeezingtons, and they studied more than 1,000 songs before they released a single one of their own. Then Bruno's sister quietly slipped one of his demo CDs to a man connected to Dr. Dre. The man almost threw it away because the voice sounded too strange, too high. But 43 seconds in, Bruno hit a note that made him stop and rewind the tape. That single note changed everything. Their first major commercial breakthrough came when they wrote the chorus for Flo Rida's Right Round, which shattered digital download records in its first week. Then they wrote Nothing on You for B.O.B., another massive hit. By the time Bruno released his own debut single, Just the Way You Are, in 2010, songs he had helped create had already sold more than 15 million downloads for other artists. He had been quietly feeding the music industry for years before anyone knew his name. When Just the Way You Are entered the Billboard Hot 100 in August 2010, it reached number 1 within 8 weeks and stayed on the chart for 48 weeks, eventually going 13 times platinum in the United States alone. Then came Grenade, which hit number 1 in 15 countries and achieved the remarkable feat of returning to the top of the Billboard charts 3 separate times between January and March 2011. By that spring, Bruno had 2 songs each certified over 5 million in American sales. The only other artist to accomplish that at the time was Lady Gaga. He received 7 Grammy nominations in his debut run, including Album and Record of the Year, and became the youngest man to win Best Male Pop Vocal since Stevie Wonder in 1974. Billboard named him their top Hot 100 artist. The IFPI called him the best-selling global artist of 2011, even ahead of Adele. The records kept falling. Locked Out of Heaven spent 6 consecutive weeks at number 1 in late 2012, making Bruno the first solo male artist since 1964 to score 4 number 1 hits in his first 2 years, a feat that had eluded even Michael Jackson. His second album, Unorthodox Jukebox, stretched across 9 different genres, terrified his record label so badly that internal memos warned radio would never play something so chaotic, and went on to sell 6 million copies worldwide. He gave up 4% of his future royalties to pay for live horns and vintage recording gear, and the gamble paid off completely. Then came Uptown Funk. Born from a late-night jam session in May 2014, it took 11 writers, became tangled in 5 separate lawsuits, and when it finally dropped in November of that year, it sat at number 1 for 14 consecutive weeks. It sold 300,000 downloads per week at its peak. It earned nearly $1 million a day in publishing revenue during its biggest stretch. The BBC used it to teach CPR. Delta Airlines reported a 37% spike in first-class drink orders the month it became their boarding music. Someone at the airline reportedly called it Uptown Drunk.